absolute delight to welcome you to this fantastic webinar that we have, the masterclass that we have for you today, featuring Dennis from Creative Navy. Before we get to Dennis, very, very quickly, just some housekeeping first and foremost. Please, it's great to see you all introducing yourself in the chat function. Please do so. We'd love to know whereabouts you're located. Also, throughout the session, if you have questions, do please use the Q&A box, not the chat box down below, as Dennis will be able to look at the questions via that function, and also see, and you have the opportunity of upvoting those questions that you would like answered more specifically or more quickly as well. The order of proceedings are that I'll very quickly get to Dennis, but firstly give you an overview of the UX design program with King's College London. I am available to answer specific questions regarding the program after Dennis's masterclass. So if you'd like to keep those questions, I'll hang around at the end and answer any questions that you have. For those of you that don't know, this innovative new career accelerator that we've designed with King's College London in UX design is first built with industry, people like Dennis. So it is completely relevant for those that are looking to either commence their career in UX design, change careers into UX design, or advance their existing career in UX. It is a 6-month program completely online. It is made up of 3 6-week courses and then 1 industry-facing project to practically apply your learning and have a really powerful tool to be able to demonstrate to employers the answer to that age-old question: how do I get the job without experience, but how do I get the experience without the job? You'll be able to relay the employer portion of the project. I'm going to answer a lot more questions later on about the program, so please stick around. You'll also be accessing a special offer for the program for those that do enroll, and an invite to a coaching masterclass, because career coaching is really one of the cornerstones of this program that makes it unique as well. There's an amazing executive style career coaching program and facilities built in to the learning as you go as well. I'm going to now introduce Dennis and get to the main portion of today's masterclass. As some of you would already know, Dennis Lenard is the CEO of Creative Navy, an award-winning London-based UX UI design agency that consistently ranks in the top 10 globally, and is the first in the world to work on the basis of scientific data. More than that, though, Dennis is also an author with a new book specifically regarding UX impact in MedTech, coming out later this year. Welcome, Dennis. Can you tell us firstly if I got all that right, and secondly, when can we expect to see the book on the bookshelves?
Hello, everyone. It's definitely going to be later this year. You have that right. Hopefully, the latest in October, if everything goes right.
Congratulations. I know it's quite a process, but it's also a labour of love. So congratulations on getting to this point already. And thank you ever so kindly for your time, and more importantly, your contribution to the success of this program thus far, to have industry experts such as yourself, globally recognised industry experts such as yourself, not only guiding some of the content development, but also being an employer partner on the program, which I'll certainly explain later in the session, the value of that more so. We very much appreciate not only your contributions, but your time today as well. I'll leave you to it. All the best. I look forward to coming back shortly at the end of the masterclass and answering the specific enrolment questions about the program as well. Over to you, Dennis. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. So I would say let's get right into it. Let's see. Yeah, the slides work. So this masterclass today won't be a how-to. I'm not going to teach you how to design those medical interfaces, because obviously that takes a lot more than an hour. But I do want to give you a sense of how design for MedTech is different, because it is different from most other things you could do in the design world. And of course, design is also very important in MedTech. It plays a key role in making these devices do their job. And so as a designer, you could be working in that field. And when I thought of what to share with you today, I had 2 types of learners in mind. On the one hand, perhaps people who are already designers, or perhaps they are just starting out in design, but nonetheless, they are curious about MedTech and perhaps are hoping, dreaming, wondering about getting into MedTech. And then all those others who haven't started design yet, but are perhaps contemplating, where should I start my career? Should I think of a particular industry or just go very broad? Well, I want to make all of these people familiar with what it means to work in design in the MedTech industry. And that's why I want to share with you what are these unique requirements and processes that you would go through when you would work in this field. All this is based on a lot of experience. And we've also launched a poll, as you can see here. I'm just curious to know what you're looking for in this masterclass. Let's see. So it looks like a lot of people are just generally interested in UX. That makes sense. I think it's very interesting for you to get to know this field of MedTech, because when people start out, or even when they've been designing for a while, I think there's a lot of excitement. But when you do difficult work, at some point you also become a little bit fatigued, let's say, or stress kicks in, and the wear and tear. And then you start wondering about, have I made the right choice? What should I do next? And so on. And I think that working on something that is meaningful and rewarding is what people are looking for. And that's the way they find in order to overcome this challenge. And I think MedTech could be that. Yeah, it looks like a lot of people have responded. I just shared the results. So it sounds like you all have a very broad interest in UX in mind. And I think you've come to the right masterclass for that, because everything I say here will make sense to you. It's not going to be very technical, and I hope you will find it interesting. So human factors is what we call UX design, or ergonomics in general, in this industry of MedTech. And that's quite an interesting thing, because the idea of design and making things usable has actually started in MedTech, or it was one of the fields where people already 5 or 6 decades ago were wondering about how can we make things usable, as opposed to the general industry of software. I think that has come very, very late. But despite this very early start and people taking the topic very seriously, they also have developed a very limited view of what it means for a device to be usable, in the sense that the standards set were very low, at least compared to what we understand today in terms of user experience design. Because the goal with those usability programs was to make the devices just barely usable, or just making them safe. Overall, the medical industry is very, very conservative. The thinking is, let's not make changes. Let's only invent the bare minimum that we need, because any kind of change is dangerous. At least that used to be the culture in this industry. I think it has changed in the last 10 years, even though progress is slow. But I think for the past few years, we're assisting a sort of a revival, where the MedTech industry has seen that actually you can do a lot more with design. So I think that's why it's a very exciting field to join today. But it is very different from all the other fields. So if you would be designing for any kind of web platform, or even mobile apps, or perhaps even other professional software, when you come into MedTech, you would find that it is very, very different. And I've listed here the factors that make it different. The most important thing being that these interfaces are usually embedded devices. So that's any kind of object or device with a touch screen. That's not a laptop or not a mobile phone. The other issue is, well, things are just complex in this industry. The things that users do are very complicated, but also businesses look at this work in a different light. There's the issue of legal approval for anything that you do, and that completely changes the product development process. So let me take you through these, and I'll just give you a tour of everything. Now, as you can see here to the right, this is just any kind of medical device. It is a device that's very different from any kind of computer or mobile phone. It is a device in and of itself, and it has a particular touch display in it. These touch displays are fairly unique. They are produced specifically for these devices. And so usually they are fairly small. As you can see here, I've listed sort of a range of screen sizes and resolution. So they are as small as 6 by 7 centimeters, maybe 26 times 18 centimeters. That's not very large. It's definitely much less than your laptop. But very importantly, the resolution is very low. So you can see here 800 by 400 pixels is it's tiny. It doesn't even compare to a smartphone that usually has perhaps 2,500 times 1,000 something. So it's less than half the size. Obviously, that makes it very, very difficult to just fit everything in, and you have to fit everything in. So that's sort of an impossible requirement that you already have to deal with, and that's, I think, something that you will come up against a lot. But you also have to deal with issues like poor luminosity. That means that the things on the screen are not as visible as you would expect because the screen doesn't have the proper brightness, or perhaps even the colors are poorly calibrated. In practice, it means that what you do on your screen while you design in Figma or whatever other software you use is not going to be what you will see on the device. And then sooner or later, you have to adapt those colors and the contrast and everything to make it work. That means a lot of experimenting with the actual hardware. But sometimes you can even run into strange surprises. We've worked with displays that don't really render the color yellow. So anything that would be yellow just wouldn't be visible on the screen. And then you have to deal with that as a designer and find workarounds. So that means that while you design, you will always be confronted with the hardware, and you have to really work with the hardware. When you design for anything that's a laptop or a mobile phone, you can sort of ignore that thought. Of course, you would need to know what is the current mainstream resolution, perhaps, to make things really work on a mobile phone. But you can take a lot of liberty. You cannot do that with these devices because they are very limited in terms of what they can do. And there are a lot of reasons why they are limited. One reason is cost. Even though the device as a whole is very expensive, most companies don't really spend that much on the screens, or perhaps they need to deal with battery use or with a lot of other considerations that make them pick a screen that isn't as great as the one on the iPhone, let's say. So as a designer, you'll be dealing with this type of challenge. But the other interesting thing is that the way people use these devices is very, very different from what you would do with a mobile phone. As you can see here to the right, you have a device with a touch screen with a lot of buttons that you can tap on in that screen, but you also have a set of physical buttons to the right side. So this is one type of situation you will be dealing with when you have a mix of a touch interface and physical buttons. But there is also the scenario where you only have a touch interface without the physical buttons, or perhaps the display only shows information, but you cannot interact with it. It doesn't have touch functionality. So everything that is an interaction will be managed via physical buttons. All of these scenarios you will be dealing with if you work in this field. And sometimes you will get to pick this. So sometimes you will have the liberty to say, yes, let's add some physical buttons or remove them because we don't need them. But other times that is somehow decided by someone else, or perhaps it is a requirement in the industry to have physical buttons for particular functions. But even when it comes to the touch functionality, it's not the same as with a mobile phone. And there are a lot of reasons for this. One is that you would hold a mobile phone in your hand, so you interact with it in a particular way. The distance to the face is, well, obviously the length of an arm, which doesn't vary that much in humans. Whereas with these devices, you can be potentially at any distance. There is even a possibility that someone else is handling the interaction with the touchscreen, but perhaps you're a surgeon operating the patient, so you don't even touch the display. So that makes the whole interaction very different, but also, again, the hardware is different. Mobile phones use capacitive touchscreens, so that means that they figure out where you've tapped and what you've done on the screen based on the capacitive resistance of the screen. But there are a lot of other types of displays, and they're all used in the medical field, such as screens that use infrared light to figure out where you've tapped, or screens that have 2 layers, and when you press one layer, it changes the resistance of the liquid between the layers, or surface acoustic waves, or even electromagnetic or force sensing screens. And they all have pros and cons. So what you will have to do as a designer is learn to understand these. If you really understand them, you will be able to mitigate those issues that they have, but also you will be able to use anything that is particularly good about them, because some of them are even more sensitive than what you have in your phone. So obviously they can be made to work better. But all in all, that means that you cannot really use those standards or design patterns that you're used to from any kind of other design area. So you cannot come in here and decide the size of the buttons or even any of the fonts based on, let's say, best practices from Apple or Android, because it's just completely different. And in most situations, there aren't any standards. You have to make up your own standards. So when you would start a project like this, you would get your hands on the screen and you would start to design, let's say, placeholder buttons and experiment with those, do some user tests to see what is the minimum safe area for people to tap or not to tap. And you would have to define those standards. I think that can be daunting for some, but it is also very interesting for a designer to really get to the core of usability and see, well, what works and what doesn't. And if you have fun doing that, then you will definitely have a lot of fun in this industry. The other thing that makes these interfaces quite special is that they are, in most situations, something I would call a single page application. So in most mobile apps, you have a lot of screens that you tap through. So you create something like a user flow where you're thinking of the steps that you would go through. The same is fairly true if you design for a web system that just works in a browser. But with these applications, it is a little bit different, because most of the functionality, if not all of it, has to fit into one screen, which is sort of the dashboard. And some other functions happen outside of that. So that is a huge challenge, because you have to deal with an enormous amount of content and interaction that needs to happen in just one layout. And then you need a layout that really fits that. But you'll also have the issue of, how do I now bring in all those other things, which are perhaps 10 or 20% of what the system does, but they are important. And we can see that here on the screen. There are a lot of numbers, there are a lot of things I can tap here to activate or deactivate certain functions. But as you can see in this pop-up, they also had to deal with how I change a particular parameter, or how I deal with a particular situation. And if you've already been through the course, or if you're interested in design, I think you will recognize that this is quite horrible in terms of usability. You cannot even truly make out the difference between this window and what sits behind. It would be difficult to tap this thing here. It's just, this is not great design, even though this is a great manufacturer. The challenge was probably so enormous that they just weren't able to find a better solution in here. And if you work in this industry, you will spend a lot of time managing this this challenge. Yeah, and what you will discover is that it will oftentimes feel as if the requirements are impossible, where you would feel, well, it's just impossible to fit all of this stuff on the screen and still make it usable. And that can be frustrating, but I think that if you keep working on it, you will discover that it's quite wonderful to eventually find the solution. So if you have the patience, it's really your chance to come up with new ideas and get to the core of what it means to think and solve problems. And then any kind of solution that you produce will be game-changing for that device in particular, but you will also find that other experts in the area will start to be influenced by the work that you do. So it's really an area where people care a lot about these design solutions, because they make a big difference, and you have the chance to truly offer something back, as opposed to perhaps in other areas where a lot of design work doesn't really leave that much room for creativity, because most problems have already been solved, and maybe some people, product managers or others, see designers perhaps particularly junior designers as just someone who can implement a pattern that already exists, but they don't expect them to add authentic value, let's say. I've called this challenge rendering reality. I'm not sure whether it's the right name, but the point is that all of these devices manage a very physical reality that is a biological system. It's not an abstract thing like emails or, let's say, social media posts or anything like that. And when you try to translate that reality via parameters and an interface into something that is, well, this abstraction here, you will come to really appreciate that little gray area where physical reality turns into something virtual. For example, when you start to represent any of these parameters like heartbeat and blood flow and all of that, you will, for example, learn that, well, it's not that easy because you have a sensor figuring out, let's say, the volume of blood that's being pumped, but that is always an approximation. And then you have to start to deal with things such as lag, where the point is, if I see 60 here, is it truly 60 in the heart, or is it 63 and it was a second ago? And there's this interesting area where we do understand physical reality, but that understanding is not perfect. And in medicine, that is very important, because the decisions made here are really critical, especially when you undergo surgery or you are in an ICU. And then as a designer, you have to really think about ways to represent that physical reality, or what happens in that loop where something is measured in a body, displayed on a screen, seen by a surgeon, interpreted, and then they perform an action. For example, if you, let's say, want to position something in the heart, perhaps a blood pump or some other type of device, details are very important. And so you will have to mind this loop, and it's quite interesting to work in that. Even things like diagrams or like these waves, they're all an approximation, and you'll have to work with that. Sometimes you will not really be able to find a solution because there is really a limitation to how we can understand and interpret reality. And then you'll have to find a way to integrate that into the interface so that people at least know that they're now dealing with something that is uncertain. But the point is that as a designer, you will have to understand the technology layer, the hardware, even a little bit of the software. You don't have to know how to code, but just when you have a conversation with the software engineers, you have to be able to understand how that works. You have to be able to understand the surgeon or the medical practitioners, and you have to find a way to bring all of these together. I think that's fascinating work if you have the patience. It really means that you will learn a lot. That is that's sure. The context of use is, of course, something unique, and I'm curious to know, perhaps we can launch a poll about that. How many of you have gotten to know it perhaps as a patient? Well, I hope you haven't been in a hospital, but maybe some of you have. Okay, so it looks like most of you have experienced this, even if not all. And as you know, it's quite it can be a hectic environment, but it is definitely very complex. We can see that here on the screen. There are lots of devices, and all this complexity that comes from the devices and the environment doesn't even compare to the complexity of the human body that the medical practitioners have to deal with. And well, you will have to deal with that as well as a designer. And so as a medical practitioner, that means you are really inundated with an abundance of information that doesn't compare to with any other kind of context of use of technology, I would say. And you have to deal with that. As a designer, you will have to therefore understand what is this amount of information that they're bombarded with, but also what matters at what point when they make decisions. And you will have to start to consider not just all those ideal cases, but also those situations where perhaps a medical practitioner is tired, or where there's an issue with lighting or the lighting changes. So it's as a designer, you will have to create your design to be very much situated in this real life context. It's not going to be an abstract thing where you're imagining, well, it doesn't really matter where you use a mobile app, because it should be designed to work anywhere. The applications you design for MedTech will have to work in this particular context. But it's definitely fascinating to come in and understand it. It's a miraculous world, I would say, where you're always confronted with I would say, the wonders that people can do. And that will also make you really appreciate medical practitioners, because you have to know their user needs. That's the same as in every industry, except that here the needs are very, very specific. Obviously, they have to do things in a certain way. When they insert something into into the body, it has to be at a particular angle, it has to be at a particular speed. They have to make sure they don't damage a particular type of tissue. So the details matter a lot. That also means that they are confronted with a huge cognitive load. And even those heuristics about cognitive load that you would generally find in design, well, they still apply here, but you have to set the standard a lot higher, because the people who will be using these tools will already be absorbed by everything else. And of course, the users here deal with a lot of responsibility. Any kind of mistake they make has consequences, even if there is no legal consequence, because the legal system recognizes that it's difficult. For the users in that moment, it matters. Most medical practitioners do actually care about what they do. And that also means that even though they do a very, let's say, technical job, where they are professionals in that moment, there's a huge emotional activation, even if they don't focus on that and they don't experience it subjectively, because they're definitely focused on the work and, let's say, what they do with their hands. It's going to be there in the background. It's going to influence how they interact with the user interface. And so you will have to get to know these medical practitioners as humans. And I think that's great, because you will tap into all the limitations of human beings. And I think that's fascinating to discover. Now, working in the medical area also comes with certain workflows. So it's not just about this human element where there's maybe even a romantic vision to that. There's also this ice cold perspective of what you can and cannot do in the medical world. So you'll have to start to understand those workflows in particular situations, such as what's the difference between a hospital and your GP? What are those workflows that they go through? What can and can't they do? Or what's the right sequence to do something? Or even what happens in an ICU with all the protocols of extreme situations, edge cases, and so on. You will have to create a design to take that into account. And the good thing is that those are known. So if you can do some work and get to know those procedures before you actually start to design or even chat to medical practitioners, you can obviously find out a lot more from them. There's this general issue of time pressure. People don't have time because there are not enough medical practitioners, I think, anywhere in the world. And so that means that you can add a lot of value as a designer. If you create a device where the actual interaction with the device takes 5 seconds less, that is a major win, even though it doesn't sound like much. Or if you create a medical device that doesn't require a lot of training, perhaps instead of 8 hours of training, you cut it down to 1 hour because it's so plug and play. That's a wonderful gift to this world. While you do all of that, you will learn the importance of accuracy. So while I think in most systems, you will deal with this issue of preventing the user from making mistakes. I think that's probably also one of the principles that you've learned about if you've already been through the course. In this case, the cost of mistakes is huge. And I'm not just thinking of, well, you've harmed the patient because you weren't using the device right, but I'm also thinking of what is the amount of work or time required to rectify a mistake. Even if it's just a procedural, it doesn't affect the patient in any way. If it then takes 6 minutes to rectify that mistake, that is a huge cost to the system. So any kind of effort you put into this will make a big difference. Now, all of that is this challenge of designing for a particular reality and for the users and all of that, but you also have to make sure that the devices you design can be approved. And there's not just one jurisdiction. You would want to be able to sell that device anywhere in the world, or at least in most countries. So you will encounter some of those differences between jurisdictions. And obviously in the United States, there's the FDA that takes care of that. In the European Union, there's the MDR, the regulation that tells you about what you have to abide by. But there are also a lot of international standards, such as these ones listed in here, that you will get to know. Most of them deal with risk management. And that's something that I think you might encounter in some industries, but not in many. So you have, as a designer, you will have to be able to figure out what exactly are the risks when someone is using this particular device. You will have to take notes of those, make that explicit, and then really think about how you can mitigate those risks. And you will have to show eventually that you've been through a process where all of that was taken into account. That's a unique thing that I think you would do, or almost unique to the medical industry. The other thing that these regulations deal with is design controls. Design controls means that you have to have a process in place where you make sure that you've been very attentive to user needs, for example. I think that's interesting because this has always, well, mostly always been the case in this industry, while other industries didn't really care much about user needs. The user needs here were very important. But you also have to document all of that in a particular manner so that you can prove to all of these organizations in the United States, in the European Union, and anywhere else that you were cognizant of that. So that means you have to organize your work in such a way that you can demonstrate all of that. There is an approval process at the end, and most manufacturers would start in a jurisdiction and then add more jurisdictions. But as a designer, that means you will be working together with legal practitioners, because it's the responsibility of getting the device approved doesn't just rest on your shoulders. You just deal with a small part of it, which is the interface, and there are experts who know how to interpret all of this regulation. But you will be working with these experts, and what you will be faced with is that these experts are very risk averse. They would say, let's create a horrible device, let's say, or a very poor usability, but something that can be approved. They would pull in that direction if there is any doubt, while you will obviously come in from the other end and say, no, it is actually okay, it's safe, it's good. Let's not compromise the user experience just because it has to fit made up criteria. And the interesting thing is that all of these regulations and standards are fairly broad. They don't tell you what to do in the interface. They don't prescribe things such as the size of buttons or colors or anything like that. They're just very broad about the process that you have to follow. So there's a lot of interaction that you'll be having with these professionals, and you have to work with them. Now, all of this has a consequence on how businesses relate to this kind of work, because it makes the design work high stakes for the business. It's not high stakes such as in other industries where, let's say e-commerce, you make a change and then the conversion rate goes up by 1%, and that means hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's a high stake thing, but it is high stakes because of this element of the safety of getting the thing approved, and because the life cycle of these products is very, very long. So while as in other industries, you'd be thinking, let's create an MVP. Can we get the product out in 2 or 3 months and then we'll just add to it? That doesn't really work that way in this industry. You would probably spend at least 2 or 3, 4 years, perhaps even 7, to create the product, and you have to make it perfect in this process, and only then can you bring it out to the market. So that means that if you've made mistakes and for some reason you cannot get the product approved, or it's not what users need and so on, you've wasted 7 or 8 years of the business, which is, well, it's inconceivable. But it also brings a lot of stakeholders to the table. I just mentioned those legal practitioners, but you'd also have subject matter experts who are probably former doctors, the hardware engineers who you would never meet if you were to design for a mobile app, and so on. So all of these stakeholders have to coalesce around the design, and you have to form consensus that what you're building is the right thing. So that makes work, I think, sometimes it is, well, challenging because you have to deal with this aspect of managing stakeholders, which is a human relational thing. It's not a technical design thing, but also interesting because you will learn a lot from all of these people, and you will learn about what it makes to make good decisions in groups, which is obviously the driving force that's bringing progress to this world. And then finally, I wanted to give you a sense of how that changes the product development process, which is the intimate world that you'll be working in with your product managers. And so previously I mentioned this idea of the MVP. You don't really have that in this space. At least it's not an MVP that's going to be put out into the market. And instead, the process starts out a lot earlier. So there has to be an initial phase, which is the innovation layer, or someone has to come up with an idea for a new way or a better way to perform a particular medical intervention. So that's a very biological, it's a very medical thing. And onto that, there's a layer of hardware engineering. So just the idea of, let's say, creating a cutting device that works in a different way, or a new kind of light, or whatever it is. And once you have that working, or you can prove that you can affect reality in that way, this phase of a concept starts, because this is the point in time where you start to think about how people could actually use this now in practice to apply it in the medical world. And so you'd be creating a product concept, which is a lot less than an MVP. It's just a rough idea, let's say, of how it could look, how it could work. And you could take this then to a lot of people, medical practitioners or even others, and just get feedback. And then you would want to evolve that into a prototype, which is sort of like an MVP, because it's not a version of the product that has everything. So it's a set of things that makes it similar to an MVP, but it is not something that's going to be released. And it's definitely more than just a click prototype. So it has to be a somewhat functioning device, let's say. This again, you would then use to test with practitioners, to get their feedback, to learn more about what they would actually want it to do and not do. And that will then probably completely change the device and the requirements of the user interface. So through that iteration, eventually you will have something that is a prototype that's very, very close to the final device. But it's probably going to be very different from what you started out with. And then when that is stable, then comes really the execution part, where, so this is a point in time where you have something that you think is sort of 90% of the device, and then you have to bring it to 100%, something that engineers can really implement. That's the execution part. And just this 10% can sometimes take a whole year of work. So you really have to perfect things down to the tiniest pixel. And then it must be tested again, even if at this point in time you know it's great, you still have to probably do a clinical trial with it, and then you have to submit it for certification. So this is a very lengthy process, which I think is great, because it means you really have the time as a designer. In most other industries, people are in a hurry and they would want to release things yesterday if possible. Not in this industry. Everybody has time. You have to keep making progress, but you can also really take the time to deal with the details and to answer some underlying and philosophical questions about the design. So that brings me to the end, really, in this question of why MedTech, or under what conditions should you be working in MedTech as a designer? And my argument is that you should do it because it is difficult. And that means that you won't really get bored, like you might get bored in other industries. And the stress that you will experience here is the right kind of stress, because it's a stress where you have to deal with a real challenge. It's not something that has come about because people were not organized, or requirements weren't clear because someone didn't do their job, or someone is rushed and so on, which is, I think, what you will experience in most other industries. In this world, the stress comes from having to deal with a challenge that is difficult. And I think that's something that really, well, it just elevates human potential, because that's the space where if you apply yourself, you can make a very meaningful contribution. And of course, medical devices are very useful. All of you who have been to a hospital before will know that it's really great when the problem that you have also has a solution, and it's absolutely not great when there is none. So you we'll have a chance to bring about more solutions. And this industry really needs courageous designers who aren't really afraid of dealing with challenges, because it is undergoing a paradigm shift. There's obviously a lot of progress in the medical industry, but specifically the world of user interfaces hasn't received much love. And manufacturers are waking up to this idea of design really adding a lot more value than just preventing the most important types of mistakes. And that is something that will have an impact on health outcomes in the next 20, 30 years. And you can be part of that. Let's take some time for questions, and while you think about those questions, you can respond to the last poll. So it looks like at least most of you are a little bit more excited about this area. I hope that beyond just this excitement, you were also able to get a sense of what might be those topics that you should be interested in, or just learn about, or just keep your eyes out about information about all of these challenges that I've brought up. So the idea of embedded interfaces, of single page applications, just the context of use and the user needs in hospital. If you ever have the chance to watch these people work, be attentive to what they do, but also some of these business aspects, or how people work in teams in the product team to bring about these interfaces.
Dennis, thank you. I'm going to ask some of the questions from the audience, if that's okay, and to reiterate the opportunity that you've outlined as well. I just did some quick research of my own to see the size of the market also in the UK, and it's an 18 billion US dollar market now, growing to 28 billion by 2028. In the US alone, it's $197 billion market at the moment. But I think the advancement of what I've seen also from my own experiences with families, that interaction between the physical and the digital, and the opportunity that presents for more real-time data for both professional and patient in many cases. I think there's also the opportunity of that interaction creating efficiencies for the health system in having more at-home care that can be closely monitored and things like that. It's such an exciting time, and such a growth area as well. I love the first question that came through. Dennis, if I could ask you, what are the ethical considerations when developing medical technologies, and how can designers ensure these technologies are used responsibly?
Oh, well, there are so many ethical considerations, and I think a lot of them are sort of encoded into this aspect of just getting these devices approved. So you cannot create a device that actually harms people, but there are also a lot of others. For example, there is this question of, okay, we've created a great medical device, it's amazing in what it can do, but it is only accessible to, let's say, 10% of the global population. How do we deal with that? But there is a lot of innovation happening in terms of making things accessible for a lot of others. For example, we've worked with a customer who created a radiation therapy device that sort of completely changes the paradigm of how that radiation is delivered. And because of that, it slashes costs by about a factor of 10. And it makes those devices transportable. So suddenly you can put them in a truck and take them to remote areas to help people. And I think the interesting thing is, in opposition, let's say, to some other areas where you have a lot of people who absolutely do not care about the ethical considerations of what they're doing, in this industry, there are a lot of people who definitely think a lot about that. So any of those challenges you will not be solving as an individual, but with others. And that obviously makes the solutions a lot better. And you can just learn.
And you spoke about medical jurisdictions. This is another question from the audience. Thank you. And if the audience has any more, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them now. With transportable devices, as you just mentioned, but does that present any challenging association with this question? How does one make sure they're designing according to those different jurisdictions? And is that a challenge when there's portability with devices as well?
Well, you wouldn't be allowed to use a particular device in a jurisdiction if it hasn't been approved. So you cannot just take it with you and start doing things in let's say in a new country. It has to be approved in that country, and no doctor would even attempt to do that. They would always ask, is this approved? I want to see the certification. Now, to actually get devices approved, the first thing you have to do is figure out the class of device that you have. In all jurisdictions, devices are divided into classes, and depending on the class that you are in, you have to get it approved in a particular way. Sometimes the process is very simple if you're, let's say, in the lowest class and it's not dangerous in any kind of way, or you have to undergo clinical trials in that particular jurisdiction. As a designer, you will definitely work together with legal practitioners and they will guide you, but it is great if you can get to know these. So that means just looking up online those regulations, and in my slides I had some examples of those international standards, for example, that you would have to abide by. They will inspire your process. It's not just about a deliverable. I think that's interesting. You can have a great deliverable if you haven't undergone a process that fits those regulations. They would say, well, no, it cannot be approved. You have to do it again. And you would do the exact same thing again, but now following the process, and would say, yes, now it's great.
Exactly. So regulated as well, which is so important when we're dealing with people's health. Ike's got a question about, are there any ergonomic considerations? And there is a question regarding the project that I'll come to in a moment, because we'll speak about that next. Any ergonomic considerations applied when working in MedTech? I assume there is with many.
Yes, but the whole UX design work that you would be doing in this industry would be about ergonomics. So that's making sure that the device is safe, but also that it is usable. And in practice, that element of it being usable would mean that you can be very accurate in what you do, means that you're very efficient, that you can operate on the patient faster, let's say, and also that you have a consistent outcome. So every time you, let's say, measure the blood with this particular device, it's going to give you the same result if it's the same reality that you're dealing with.
Getting through a couple of more questions before we move to the why MedTech and then the employer project. And just a reminder, I will stay around after Dennis's valuable presentation to answer any specific questions about the course and the application process. And there is a question regarding the practicality of the course that I'll touch on shortly. The next one is, thank you, Mitali, great session. I wanted to know that I have experience in designing for physical medical products as well as in UI UX. Is there any scope for career in end-to-end design, or is it becoming more segregated now?
Both. Well, there are a lot of situations where it's becoming segregated, but even so, there is always a gray area where the two influence each other. And I gave that example with the physical buttons, for example. That might be a decision made by the physical product designer, perhaps in collaboration with the product manager. And so that's where you set up the UX design in a particular direction. But there is also end-to-end design. And some devices are really so innovative that is very important. And I think what we'll see in the future is there will be more, let's say, overlap between the software layer and what you would do with a physical device design. Because so far, I think this segregation where you basically have a box with a display and something you hold in your hand has been in place because it is easier to think that way, but not because it is better. And so if you can work on both of those aspects, or perhaps in time you will become more specialized either on the UX layer or on the physical product design, but having experience in both, I think will make you a fantastic expert that people will want to work with.
Brilliant. Thank you kindly, and thank you to the audience for those questions. Feel free to pop any more in that you would like to. On the next slide, just open that up, sorry. Anything else you'd like to touch on, Dennis, before we just discuss briefly the employer project?
No, I think we can segue into that because it ties in quite neatly with what I've been talking about.
It does very much so, and thank you kindly. So as I mentioned at the start, and as I mentioned for the audience that do want to stay and learn more about that, the program, we've designed this as practically as possible. There are no exams, for example, in the 3 courses. People are instead empowered to build their digital portfolio of evidence through presentations and assignments, and very practical in its application, very industry relevant and engaged. The learning outcomes of the 3 courses then culminate in the learner's opportunity to participate in a live industry or employer-facing project. I'm just going to change the slides. So that is an opportunity to bring the skills learnt over those 3 courses. The learners will meet with you, in this case, or one of your team, to understand the scope of the project. And then as a team of 4 or 5 high caliber learners, they've got a 6-week project to come up with innovative and tangible solutions. Dennis, can you run us through what the employer project may look like that learners will experience and encounter during the program with Creative Navy?
Yeah, so I can tell you about how we picked the project. We didn't intend it to be MedTech. That wasn't one of our goals. Instead, we created a list of criteria that would make this real case application something that you would really learn from. And then we selected, I think it was about 30 real projects that we had that would fit most of these criteria. And then we created a short list of about 5. And then eventually we picked the winning one, which by coincidence actually is in this area of MedTech. But it is an application for consumers, so it's not an application used by medical doctors. And I think that actually makes it really good for learning, because you will be dealing with something that you are familiar with, and you wouldn't have to, let's say, invest hours and hours to just understand an industry that's alien to you. It's something that you already know, and then you can really come in and focus on the UX, which is what you want to do in this program. But nonetheless, the requirements are such that you would say, oh, well, this is not easy to design for. And I think that's very important, because it comes with a mix of challenges that you will be able to solve. And, maybe you will be able to solve one of them, maybe you'll be able to solve all of them. That doesn't really matter that much. The point is that it's open-ended in the sense that you'll have these challenges that you will be confronted with, and you will learn as much as you can. It's designed in such a way that you really, no matter what your level is, you can go as far as you want, because there's no real end to it. And so that means that you will definitely develop your skills and your thinking, and the outcome of it will be that obviously you'll have a portfolio item, but that portfolio item will demonstrate these skills that you've acquired. So those will be skills about, let's say, how to create a wireframe. That's something that's very practical, but also skills about how you understand and interpret requirements, or what you do when they aren't really that clear. So all of that thinking you will be able to prove with these designs and all the deliverables that you'll be create, and that will make the portfolio item something that is credible. Because I see a lot of portfolios, obviously, and sometimes you don't really know whether that is truly demonstrative of skill, because you're thinking, well, it looks interesting, but you could have just copied this from anywhere. Who knows if you've done that? With others, it's immediately obvious that it's probably honest work, but it is superficial. That's not going to be the case here. I think people will really see, oh, I see someone has done thinking in here. Let's try to understand it a little bit better. But also, I would say, don't be worried that this is going to be only relevant for people who are in MedTech. This portfolio item that you'll be creating will be applicable in all industries. Whether it's a design for consumers or not, just the types of interactions you'll be designing are something that you would see in a lot of applications out there, whether for the web or mobile. So I think people looking at that will think, oh, yeah, I can see how you've done something that is also part of our product.
That's fantastic. And that's such a benefit for people to then relay in a job interview, be that internally with their existing employer or for a new employer, should they be looking to either commence or change careers into UX, that overcomes that question that they always face, what experience do you have? To relay that they've worked with you and your team on a project such as that is going to hold people in really, really good stead, along with the portfolio of evidence as well. Any final questions for Dennis before I move into speaking about the program and the application process? The coaching session is available and the special offer as well. Someone's asked, is the UX program very practical? I need experience. Yes, we've just demonstrated that in many, many ways. But that's our design philosophy for the content of all the career accelerators. It's designed to enhance one's technical capabilities, but also the business application of those technical capabilities, along with their employability through the career coaching and positioning and demonstration of skills. And then lastly, your personal growth is so important as a part of the learning outcomes as well. That critical thinking, that reflective, that goal-setting process, that is also so important for employers to understand that those soft skills that one has as well. If there's no more questions for Dennis, I'll move on. But firstly, thank you. That was a fascinating insight into what I think is an industry and an area that impacts all of us, directly and indirectly. Indirectly, if you're lucky enough, directly if you've had an issue that you need addressed before. But also, I think the changing landscape is also the opportunity that you've outlined today as well. Thank you also for your continued contribution to not only making this a very unique program, but a unique experience that people go through in the program, having working with your agency and yourself on projects such as this to apply their new skills to. Dennis, it is very much appreciated.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Good on you. Thank you kindly. I'll stay around now for those that would like to know more about the process, the entry criteria, but thank you for your time, Dennis, and all the best. I'll speak soon.
Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you all. Brilliant to have such an industry leader speak to us all today about that, and to give you an overview of the really innovative industry project that he will be providing for the participants of the program. The program is commencing onboarding shortly. I'll just bring up some of the additional information for it as well. 1 second. And what I will do for you now also is share a few things. Some of them are already in the chat, but for those that are interested, I'll walk you through what is required. As previously mentioned, it's a 6-month program. Often, and feel free to drop questions in here. I'm here to answer your questions as well. Drop them in the Q&A. But some of the most common questions that we encounter are not only the practicality of it, but practical questions as well, like how many hours per week. So I can tell you that it is delivered completely online. There is a blend of what we deem synchronous and asynchronous learning, meaning that there are live sessions that you, as a student cohort, attend weekly. They are facilitated by an industry expert that will walk you through the modules of the week, answer the questions that you have. The sessions are always recorded should you not be able to attend on your birthday or whatever, so you can always catch up. And then there's the asynchronous session, which makes up the majority of learning, where you choose how and when study fits in with your life, rather than you fit in with university. It is recommended that it's going to be around that 15 to 16 hours per week, as I said, with one live hour and a half session per week, and then the rest is up to you as to how you fit that in with your life. Just a reminder, the 3 courses that make up the content, as well as that industry project that we've already gone through, is understanding users first and foremost, and there's a very heavy research element to a lot of the content as well. Designing for user needs is course 2. And then user-centered product optimization, along then with the opportunity of combining all of your learning outcomes, not only into a digital portfolio to demonstrate to employers, but also to apply that learning to the industry project at the end. the course commences onboarding on next week, and there's 3 weeks of onboarding where you're supported with your success manager. You are treated much more like a customer than a student in this program through that success manager relationship that you will develop, and the addition of an executive style career coach. For those that didn't have the opportunity of attending the webinar I hosted, our webinar 2 weeks ago, Tracy, one of our excellent career coaches, was pivotal, along with the industry experts we had there, which is available on our YouTube channel, and gave fabulous insights into breaking into UX especially. So there's a lot of assets that you can access there. Some of the other most commonly asked questions are payment plans and entry criteria. I'll touch on the entry criteria first. It is aimed at postgraduate, so it is a requirement that you have either a bachelor degree or 2 years of professional experience. And if you're not sure about that, or if you've got close to that, or you'd like to seek clarity on that, the best thing to do would be to book a time with your friendly enrollment advisor. And there is a link in the chat function. If you have a look there, you'll see the link. What I'll share now, if I can, is, one second. I'm going to link the application form for those of you that would like to go through that now. I'll put it in the chat function. The application form is here, and it is a matter of clicking on that application form, filling out your details, providing your academic transcript or the qualification that you may have, and then a one-page personal statement. The personal statement is very straightforward. It's just, again, there's a link in the chat for you now. The template that I've just provided is simply giving you an outline to remove any barriers that you have toward applying. So just fill out the personal statement, you upload that into the application portal along with your degree certificate or your resume if you are applying with professional experience instead of your academic qualification, and then your enrollment advisor will be in touch. Oh, sorry, there is the requirement of one point of ID as well. We turn applications around with Kings very promptly, and have, aside from if you haven't spoken with an enrollment advisor, they'll reach out, answer any questions that you may have, discuss payment plans with you as well. So the course fees are £7,995 with nothing more to purchase. That includes 6 to 7 live coaching sessions with an executive style career coach. It includes numerous masterclasses with people like Dennis, and also it includes the networking opportunities that this program presents, both with your fellow peers, but also with industry who are often looking to recruit people from the program, as well as the 6-month in-depth learning. We want to make this accessible to as many learners as possible, although we do cap our enrollments per presentation, but we therefore offer payment plans with no fees and no interest, and they can be over 6, 9 or 12 monthly payment plans. And very happy to also announce that we are partnering with EdAid to offer 24-month payment plans, again with no fees and no interest, which in terms of an investment in yourself for your future will pay off in spades, as Dennis has given many examples tonight, but also when you consider either commencing, changing or advancing your career, that return on investment is quite evident. So if you've clicked on the application page, if you've downloaded the personal statement, the best thing to do is make a decision for you in your future to ask me any questions that you have about the program or the application process. For those that have attended, I'm very pleased to also offer a £500 discount. So today, by just attending a webinar, you've potentially made or saved £500 off the cost of the program. You've heard amazing insights from Dennis, the CEO of a top 10 agency globally, and even having the project on your portfolio is going to have so much weight with employers when you go for your dream job. And you've also got an invite to a coaching session as well. That's a lot of value that we've we've tried to provide, or we have provided within one session for you, and I think is also evidenced in the value that you'll find in the program. Does anyone have any other questions, or would you find it beneficial if I walk you through the actual application process? Happy to do either. If people have questions, I'm here to answer and support them, or answer them in the chat as well. All right, so got some people wanting me to walk through the application process. So let's do that now. 1 second. Okay, hopefully that comes up, and you'll see the registration page here, filling out your name and your password there. 1 second. 1 second. I've got too many windows open. So we start the application. We go through to here. Just double checking that that's all working. Again, filling out your particulars here, including your personal details, address, program of interest. Obviously, we choose the UX Design Career Accelerator. Oops, sorry, got to go through all of them. I'll just put in today's date. Sorry, I should have done this already. And we'll just make it up very quickly. So option 1, applying with academic criteria. If that's what you choose to do, then you would go ahead and fill that out. As an MBA, did you complete this qualification in the country? We'll just do it quickly. And then you would upload your academic transcript there. It just needs to be the certificate. It doesn't need to be the full transcript. Sorry, just the qualification is fine for the program. And now it's wanting me to upload something. I'll upload a screenshot of something. Next, language information. There is English language requirements for King's College, obviously. And if you need further information, it is available at the end of this process, but also your enrolment advisor as a basic guide. If you've worked in an English-speaking company for 2 years, or you've had an IELTS, if you need an IELTS of 7 as the bands, you'll meet the criteria. Going through professional, you do not need to apply with this if you do have already the undergraduate degree requirement. If you don't have the undergraduate degree requirement and you choose to do this, you'll need to obviously just go through the steps of uploading a CV, mentioning your position in the company and so forth. We won't do that now because we did it with the academic transcript. This is where the personal statement comes into it. So fill out the personal statement, upload it here, upload your proof of identity in form of a driver's license, birth certificate or similar, agree to the T's and C's, and then we will turn that application around. I'll say within 24 hours because we meet with Kings regularly, but 24 to 48 hours. If you haven't spoken with an enrolment advisor, they will reach out to you to answer any other questions that you have, to discuss which payment plan is best for you, as well as any other things that they can support you with in terms of the application as well. So plenty to go through. I hope that helped. We really look forward to welcoming and supporting you in this most innovative program. My team are here to assist. Please do reach out through clicking on the book a time link. Download the brochure that's also in the chat function. And lastly, obtain the maximum amount of value you can from the decision that you've made to attend and give up so much of your time today. Jump on that career coach link, because that will really set you up for, it's designed to be a set yourself up for success workshop with one of the career coaches, and it's going to be a fabulous session. So I would like to thank you and applaud you for not only sticking around for the extra session, but for engaging so much on Dennis's discussion regarding UX in MedTech. go ahead and make that positive decision, and you've got a great team of support behind you. Thank you kindly, and have a wonderful day.